Hello, dear listeners. Today you will hear a story about how a haunted sniper faces an impossible choice when a child enters his crosshairs, threatening lives and his soul. By the way, write in the comments which city you are from. We're very curious to know. Now sit back and enjoy the story. He'd trained for years to be invisible, lethal, but today, his greatest enemy wasn't in his scope, it was in his soul. The morning sun, filtered through the dusty blinds of his small apartment, found Alpha meticulously cleaning his old hunting rifle. Not his service rifle, that was locked away, a relic of a life he'd tried to leave behind. This was a civilian model, a bolt action. Almost 8, well-maintained, its blued steel gleaming under his careful touch. Every movement was precise, economical, a testament to years of ingrained discipline. He ran a patch through the bore, the faint smell of solvent a ghost of a memory. Not unpleasant, just familiar. The quiet hum of the refrigerator was the loudest sound in the room, a stark contrast to the cacophony that once defined his existence. His name was John, but to those who knew him in the service, he was Alpha, a call sign earned through a reputation for surgical precision and an unnerving calm under pressure. Now, he was just John, a man living a quiet life in a small town, far from the sand and the screams. He moved to the kitchen, a mug of black coffee steaming in his hand. The local newspaper lay folded on the counter, headlines screaming about local politics and the rising price of gas. He scanned it without real interest, his gaze automatically drifting to the window, observing the street below. A woman walked her dog, a delivery truck rumbled past, a kid on a skateboard zipped by. His eyes, even in this mundane setting, still cataloged potential threats, escape routes, vantage points. It was an unconscious habit, a ghost limb of his former profession. He'd catch himself doing it, sometimes, and a flicker of something, regret, weariness, would cross his face. The coffee was bitter, just how he liked it. He thought of Bravo, his old spotter. Bravo, who always had a joke, even when the air was thick with gunpowder and dread. Bravo, who understood the unspoken language of a two-man sniper team, the subtle shifts in breathing, the micro-adjustments of a scope. They'd been an unstoppable force, a perfectly calibrated machine, until that one mission. The memory was a shard of glass in his mind, always there, always sharp. He saw it again, not a full-blown flashback, but a quick, brutal flash. The dusty market, the target in his scope, the sudden, unexpected movement. A child, a civilian, the shot, the scream, the dust. The silence that followed was worse than any explosion. It wasn't a clean kill, it was a mistake, a tragic irreversible error that had cost an innocent life. The investigation had cleared him, deemed it an unavoidable accident in the chaos of combat, but the verdict meant nothing to him. The image of the child, caught in his crosshairs, then collapsing, was etched into his retina, burned into his soul. It was the reason he left, the reason he sought this quiet, unremarkable life. He'd tried therapy, tried talking, but how do you explain the weight of taking a life, even by accident, to someone who hasn't lived it? How do you articulate the moral injury that festers long after the physical wounds heal? His days now were filled with routine, a deliberate attempt to build a wall against the past. He worked odd jobs, carpentry, landscaping, anything that required focus but not complex human interaction. He preferred the company of tools and the quiet satisfaction of a job done well. Sometimes he'd go to the local shooting range just to keep his skills sharp. Not for any particular reason, he told himself, just a hobby. But the truth was, the rifle felt natural in his hands, an extension of himself. He could still group rounds tighter than anyone else on the range, a testament to the thousands of hours he'd spent behind a scope. It was a skill he couldn't simply unlearn, a part of his identity he couldn't fully shed, no matter how hard he tried. He remembered a mission in the Hindu Kush, a high-value target in a fortified compound. He'd held his breath for what felt like an eternity, the wind whispering secrets across the valley, the sun baking the rocks. The shot was over 1,200 meters, a near impossible distance, but he'd made it. One shot, one kill. The exhilaration, the sense of accomplishment, had been profound. Now that memory was tainted, overshadowed by the one that followed. He often wondered if the precision, the cold calculation required for such a shot was what made the accidental one so devastating. The contrast between perfect execution and tragic error was a chasm he couldn't bridge. His neighbor, an elderly woman named Mrs. Henderson, waved to him from her porch. He offered a curt nod, a practiced gesture of polite distance. She was kind, always trying to engage him in conversation, but he found it difficult. What could he tell her about his life, about the quiet horror that still haunted his nights? He kept his responses brief, his eyes often scanning the street, a subconscious defensive posture. He was a man of few words, a consequence of a profession where silence was often survival. The world outside his window was peaceful, almost too peaceful. He knew deep down that this fragile calm was temporary. The past had a way of catching up, and the skills he tried to bury were still very much alive, waiting for the call. A sudden sharp ring shattered the morning's tranquility. His burner phone, tucked away in a drawer, vibrated insistently. He stared at it for a long moment, the familiar, urgent tone a jolt to his system. It was a number he hadn't seen in years, a direct line to a life he'd sworn off. His hand trembled slightly as he reached for it, a cold dread coiling in his gut. He knew, with a certainty that chilled him to the bone, that this call wasn't about catching up. It was about duty. It was about war. It was about the past, clawing its way back into his carefully constructed present. He picked up the phone, the world outside his window suddenly fading, replaced by the ghost of sand and smoke. The voice on the other end was gruff, familiar, cutting straight to the point. "Alpha, we got a situation. They're asking for you." He closed his eyes, a sigh escaping him. The peace was over. The quiet was broken. He was Alpha again, whether he wanted to be or not. The weight of the rifle was nothing compared to the weight of the decision pressing down on him. The mundane piece of his current life had shattered, pulling him back into the very crucible he tried to escape. The scent of coffee was quickly replaced by the acrid tang of anticipation, a bitter taste in his mouth as he prepared to confront the ghosts he'd tried so hard to outrun. The shrill, insistent ring of the secure line tore through the quiet hum of Alpha's apartment, a jarring intrusion that instantly shattered the fragile peace he'd meticulously built. It wasn't a civilian call. Those were rare enough. This was the sound of the world demanding his particular brand of expertise, the kind that dealt in life and death from a distance. He answered on the second ring, his voice a low, controlled rumble. "Alpha." The voice on the other end was Commander Hayes, crisp and urgent, cutting straight to the point. "We have a developing situation, Alpha. Hostage scenario, downtown, high-value targets, high-risk environment. Intel's thin, but it's escalating fast." Alpha felt the familiar shift, the internal gears grinding into place. The civilian world receded, replaced by the stark geometry of a mission brief. He pulled on a worn t-shirt, already moving towards his gear locker, his mind sifting through the fragmented information. Downtown meant urban sprawl, concrete canyons, unpredictable sightlines. High-value targets meant political leverage, or worse, a message. He knew the drill. Every muscle remembered the rhythm of preparation. The weight of the rifle was nothing compared to the weight of the decision pressing down on him. Within minutes, Alpha was in the back of an unmarked SUV, the city lights blurring past. His spotter, Bravo, a man whose calm demeanor was as reliable as the rifle itself, was already running through the initial intel on a tablet. 3 armed hostiles, possibly 4, occupying the top floor of the old Mercantile Bank building. 6 hostages confirmed, 2 security personnel, 4 civilians. Demands are unclear. Negotiators are trying to establish contact. Alpha nodded, absorbing the data. The Mercantile Bank. Old brick and steel, perfect for deflecting signals, creating dead zones. A sniper's nightmare, or a canvas for precision, depending on your perspective. The vehicle pulled to a stop a few blocks from the exclusion zone. The air was thick with the thrum of generators, the distant wail of sirens, and the low chatter of tactical teams already in position. The organized chaos was a familiar symphony. They moved quickly, efficiently, through a labyrinth of back alleys and service entrances, a ghost in the urban night. Alpha's G-28 was already assembled, its scope capped, resting against his chest. He felt the familiar, almost comforting weight of the rifle, an extension of his will. They ascended a nearby office building, floor by floor, until they reached the designated overwatch position, a dusty, abandoned executive suite overlooking the Mercantile Bank. Bravo immediately began setting up the observation equipment, the laser rangefinder, the wind gauges, the thermal imager. Alpha, meanwhile, scanned the target building with his binoculars, his eyes dissecting the architecture, searching for angles, weaknesses, potential points of entry or egress. The top floor was dark, save for a flickering light in one window. A shadow moved. He felt the familiar calm settle over him, the hyper-focus that shut out everything but the mission. His breathing slowed, each inhale and exhale a measured rhythm. Commander Hayes' voice crackled through his earpiece, tight with urgency. "Alpha, Bravo, report. What do you see? Negotiators are getting nowhere. We need options now." Bravo gave a concise rundown of their setup and initial observations. Alpha added, "Limited visibility on the north face, Commander. Heavy glass, reflective. South face offers a better view, but it's a longer shot, and we'd be exposed." The pressure was already mounting. The silence from Hayes was heavy, punctuated only by the distant, muffled shouts from the ground teams trying to establish a perimeter. Alpha continued to scan, his gaze lingering on the flickering light. He imagined the scene inside, the terror, the desperation. He'd been in those situations before, on both sides of the glass, metaphorically speaking. The weight of responsibility was a constant companion, a heavy cloak he wore with grim familiarity. He knew the standard operating procedures, the protocols for hostage rescue. Snipers were the last resort, the surgical option when all else failed. But even then there were rules, lines that weren't crossed. He'd always prided himself on his discipline, his unwavering adherence to the code. A brief, almost imperceptible tremor ran through him as a memory flashed. The dust, the screams, the civilian. He pushed it down, focusing on the here and now. The mission demanded absolute clarity. Bravo spoke, his voice low, pulling Alpha from his brief internal detour. "Movement in the south-facing window, Alpha. Looks like one of the hostiles. Tall, heavy build, carrying what looks like an AK pattern rifle." Alpha adjusted his scope, the world narrowing to a precise, magnified view. The image was grainy, but clear enough. He saw the hostile, pacing, agitated. The man's shadow stretched long and distorted against the flickering light. A grotesque puppet master. Then, another figure, smaller, was roughly pushed into view, held by the hostile. A hostage. The stakes had just ramped up another notch. Hayes' voice again, sharper this time. "Alpha, Bravo, confirm visual on hostile and hostage. We're losing time. Any clean shots?" Alpha held his breath, his finger hovering near the safety. The shot was there, a difficult one, but possible. He could neutralize the immediate threat, potentially creating an opening for the entry team. But the hostage was too close, too exposed. Collateral damage was a risk he wouldn't take unless absolutely necessary. He'd seen enough of that to last a lifetime. "Negative, Commander," Alpha reported, his voice steady. "Hostage is too close to the hostile. No clean kill shot without unacceptable risk to the captive." A sigh of frustration came through the comms. "Understood. Keep eyes on. We need a window, Alpha. Anything. Negotiators are reporting increased aggression from the subject." The minutes stretched, each one feeling like an hour. Alpha's eyes burned, but he didn't waver. He thought about the families of those hostages, the fear they must be experiencing. He thought about the cold calculations that went into these decisions, the grim arithmetic of lives saved versus lives lost. He knew, deep down, that this was going to be one of those missions that tested everything he believed in. He'd seen the worst of humanity, and he'd seen the best, often in the same desperate situations. This was no different. The air grew colder as the night deepened. Bravo continued to monitor, providing a steady stream of data. Thermal signature indicates at least 3 hostiles moving between floors. No clear pattern. Hostages appear to be confined to the top floor. Alpha shifted slightly, adjusting his position, trying to find a better angle. He scanned the adjacent buildings, looking for alternative overwatch points, but their current position was the best they had. He was the tip of the spear, the final arbiter of life and death, and the weight of that responsibility was immense. He ran through mental simulations, calculating trajectories, windage, potential ricochets off the old bank's ornate facade. Every scenario led back to the same grim conclusion. A frontal assault was a bloodbath waiting to happen, and a sniper's intervention was their only viable path. But the parameters were all wrong. The angles were poor, the targets obscured, the risks to the hostages too high. He felt the familiar gnawing anxiety, the cold dread that preceded an impossible choice. He knew that soon, the impossible choice would present itself. It always did. The question was, what form would it take this time, and would he be able to make it? He remembered a conversation with an old mentor years ago, during a particularly brutal training exercise. "The hardest part isn't pulling the trigger, Alpha," the mentor had said, his voice gravelly. "It's knowing when not to, and sometimes it's knowing when to pull it, even when every fiber of your being screams no." The words echoed in his mind, a grim prophecy. He felt a cold dread begin to seep into his bones. This wasn't just another mission. This was something else entirely. The comms crackled, a new voice, sharper, more panicked. "Alpha, Bravo, we have a visual on another hostage. Civilian, small, appears to be a child." The words "a child" hit Alpha like a physical blow, a cold, sharp shock that momentarily fractured his focus. He blinked, shaking his head slightly, as if to clear the unwelcome static from his mind. His breath hitched, a silent gasp caught in his throat. The flickering light in the Mercantile Bank building seemed to intensify, drawing his gaze, compelling him to verify the unthinkable. He forced himself to breathe, to push back the encroaching memories of the past, the civilian casualty that had haunted his every waking moment for years. This couldn't be happening again. Not like this. He gripped the rifle, the cold metal a stark contrast to the sudden fire in his gut. The urgency in Commander Hayes' voice had been palpable, but now a new, more profound pressure settled over Alpha. The crushing weight of a moral dilemma far greater than any tactical challenge. He knew what was coming, the impossible choice that would demand everything from him, and possibly break him. As he adjusted his scope, his hands steady despite the tremor in his soul, the image of a small, terrified face began to resolve in the crosshairs. A horrifying confirmation that the true test of his resolve was just beginning. The mundane piece of his current life had not just shattered, it had been utterly obliterated, pulling him back into the very crucible he tried to escape, a crucible now forged in the unbearable heat of an unconscionable target. The crosshairs danced, a cruel ballet of life and death. But this time, the target wasn't a combatant. It was a child. The realization hit Alpha with the force of a physical blow, a cold dread seeping into his bones that was far worse than any fear of enemy fire. He'd been scanning the third-story window for what felt like an eternity, the scope a tunnel into a nightmare. Bravo, his spotter, had just confirmed the hostage-taker's position. A man, mid-30s, agitated, weapon visible. But then the man shifted and a small, terrified face appeared, pressed against the glass, framed by the man's arm. Not a shield, not a tool of war. A child. A tremor, almost imperceptible, ran through Alpha's hands. The image of the marketplace, the dust, the scream, the woman's eyes, it all flooded back with sickening clarity. Commander Hayes' voice crackled in his ear, urgent, strained. "Alpha, confirmation on target acquisition. We're losing the negotiator. Dr. Green says he's escalating." Alpha didn't respond immediately, his breath catching in his throat. The child, maybe 5 or 6, was crying silently, tears tracking paths through the grime on its cheeks. The hostage-taker, the adversary, as Dr. Green had labeled him, was pacing erratically, a blurred figure behind the child. Alpha's mind raced, desperate for an alternative. There had to be another way. He scanned the building, the adjacent rooftops, the narrow alley below. No clear shot at the man without risking the child. The angles were all wrong, the light fading, playing tricks on his vision. He mentally ran through every non-lethal option, every tactical maneuver, but they all came up short. The only shot that guaranteed the hostage-taker's incapacitation also guaranteed. He couldn't even form the thought. He remembered the debriefing after the marketplace incident, the cold, clinical questions, the way his hands had shaken for days. Collateral damage, they'd called it, a phrase that had haunted his sleep for years. He'd seen children in combat zones before, victims of circumstance, but never like this, never as the focal point of his crosshairs. He closed his eyes for a fraction of a second, picturing his own younger sister, her innocent laughter. This wasn't war. This was something else, something far more twisted. "Alpha, report." Hayes's voice was sharper now, laced with frustration. "What's your status? We have a breach team on standby, but a direct engagement is high risk." Bravo, sensing Alpha's internal struggle, spoke softly. "Alpha, talk to me. What do you see?" Alpha opened his eyes, the child's face still there, a ghost in his scope. He saw the hostage-taker briefly turn, his back to the child, but the angle was still impossible. A headshot would pass through the child's small body. He could try for a limb, a shoulder, but the risk of missing, of further agitating the man, was too high. And what if the man reacted by harming the child? The thought sent a jolt of ice through him. He remembered a training exercise years ago, where a simulated hostage situation had gone sideways because a sniper had hesitated. The instructor had drilled it into them. Hesitation kills. But this wasn't a simulation. This was real, and the target was a child. He felt a profound sense of failure, a deep-seated anger at the situation, at himself, at the world that put him in such an impossible position. He tried to communicate a new strategy, a desperate plea for a different approach. "Commander, the target, he's using a child as a shield, no clean shot. Requesting alternative extraction protocol, possibly a diversionary tactic to draw him away from the window." There was a beat of silence on the comms, heavy and suffocating. Then Hayes's voice, colder, harder. "Alpha, we are out of time. Negotiations have failed. He's made demands we cannot meet. He's threatening to execute a hostage in 5 minutes. We have 2 other hostages inside that room. Alpha, 2 adults. Your shot is the only way to prevent further casualties." The words hung in the air, a death sentence. The weight of the rifle felt like a tombstone. He looked at the child again, so small, so vulnerable. The memory of the marketplace, the woman's scream, the blood. It wasn't just a memory anymore. It was a living, breathing presence, clawing at his conscience. He had sworn an oath to protect, to save lives. But at what cost? Was the life of one child less valuable than 2 adults? The math was simple, brutal. The morality was anything but. He thought of Dr. Green, the negotiator, whose voice had been so calm, so reassuring, now failing. He thought of the breach team, waiting, ready to storm a potential bloodbath. The pressure was immense, crushing. He was Alpha, the best, the one who always made the shot. But this shot would shatter him. He saw a flicker of movement, the hostage-taker pulling the child closer, a grotesque parody of an embrace. The clock was ticking, not just on the lives of the hostages, but on Alpha's very soul. "Alpha, 3 minutes!" Hayes' voice was a hammer blow. Alpha's breath hitched. He adjusted his scope, the child's face filling the lens, innocent, terrified. He could feel the tremor in his hands again, not from cold, but from the raw, primal scream building in his chest. He took a slow, deliberate breath, the training kicking in, trying to override the horror. He focused on the hostage-taker's head, just above the child's shoulder, a sliver of an opening. It was a high-risk shot, a near-impossible one, but it was the only one that didn't guarantee the child's death. He squeezed his eyes shut for a split second, the image of the marketplace woman superimposed over the child's face. No, not again. He wouldn't. He couldn't. But the 2 adults inside, the ones he hadn't even seen, their lives depended on him. He heard Bravo's quiet, steady breathing beside him, a stark contrast to the hurricane raging within him. "Alpha, make the call," Bravo whispered. Not an order, but a plea. Alpha's finger hovered over the trigger, the cold metal a conduit to an abyss. He could feel the pulse throbbing in his temples, hear the frantic beat of his own heart. The world narrowed to the crosshairs, the sliver of a target, and the child's innocent eyes. He had to choose, right now. 1 life for 2. Or all 3 lost. The choice was a blade, twisting in his gut. Then, a sudden unexpected shift. The hostage-taker, agitated by something unseen, shoved the child aside, momentarily exposing his profile. It was a fleeting window, less than a second. Alpha's training, honed over decades, took over. Instinct, not emotion, guided his hand. The crosshairs snapped into place. A silent prayer, a choked sound, escaped his lips. The shot was clean, precise. The hostage-taker crumpled. The child, startled, screamed, but was unharmed. Chaos erupted below. The breach team moved in. Alpha didn't watch. He lowered his rifle, his body shaking uncontrollably, the adrenaline crash hitting him like a physical wave. He had made the shot. He had saved the hostages. But at what cost to himself? The image of the child, albeit unharmed, was now seared into his mind, another ghost to join the woman from the marketplace. The silence in the nest was deafening, broken only by Bravo's quiet, "Good shot, Alpha. You saved them." But Alpha knew, deep in his bones, that he hadn't saved himself. The mission was over, the immediate crisis averted. But for Alpha, the battle had just begun. A silent war within his own mind, a war that would rage long after the echoes of the gunshot had faded. The weight of the rifle was nothing compared to the weight of the decision pressing down on him. Every breath was a calculation, every heartbeat a drumbeat of the past. The dust, the screams, the civilian, it all came rushing back, amplified by the sight of the child in the crosshairs. His training, years of it, had forged him into a precision instrument, but it hadn't prepared him for this. Commander Hayes' voice, tight with desperation, cut through the comms. "Alpha, we're out of options. Negotiations have failed. They're starting to separate the hostages. We need that shot now." The words were a hammer blow, each syllable echoing the impossible burden. Bravo, his spotter, a man who'd seen Alpha through hell and back, offered a silent, grim nod, his own face a mask of strain. The target, the hostage-taker, was using the child as a human shield, a cruel, calculated move that rendered every conventional solution useless. The thermal imaging confirmed the child's proximity, a small, innocent heat signature pressed against the man's chest. There was no clean shot, no angle that didn't risk the child. The air in the cramped sniper's nest grew heavy, thick with unspoken terror and the metallic tang of fear. Alpha's mind raced, a whirlwind of tactical data, moral codes, and haunting memories. He replayed every scenario, every possible trajectory. Could he graze the man, force him to flinch, create a window? The risk was too high. A non-lethal shot in this situation was a gamble with lives, not just one, but all of them. He remembered a training exercise years ago where a simulated hostage situation went sideways because a shooter hesitated, trying for a perfect shot that didn't exist. Lives were lost. He'd sworn then he wouldn't make that mistake, but that was a simulation. This was real. The child's face, innocent and terrified, flickered in his vision, superimposed over the image of the civilian he'd accidentally killed all those years ago. The memory was a raw wound, perpetually refusing to heal. He could still hear the distant wail, the sudden, sickening realization. The subsequent investigation had cleared him, deemed it an unavoidable tragedy in the fog of war, but the verdict meant nothing to the ghost that haunted his sleep. Dr. Green, the negotiator, came back on the line, her voice strained. "He's threatening to execute the first hostage in 5 minutes, Alpha. He's serious." 5 minutes. The clock was a relentless drumbeat against his temples. He saw the hostage-taker shift, his grip tightening on the child, a perverse shield against justice. A distant siren wailed, almost imperceptible over the comms, but perhaps enough to draw a flicker of the hostage-taker's attention. A momentary break in his absolute focus. The man's eyes, even through the high-powered optics, seemed to mock him. A cold, hard knot formed in Alpha's stomach. He'd seen men like this, devoid of empathy, using innocence as a weapon. He thought of his own childhood, a fleeting image of playing in a sun-drenched park, a stark contrast to the grim reality unfolding before him. He thought of the faces of the other hostages, glimpsed briefly through a window, a mother, an elderly man, a young couple. Their lives, hanging by a thread, depended on him. He took a deep, shuddering breath, the air burning in his lungs. The rifle, a familiar extension of his arm, felt impossibly heavy. He had to find a way. He had to. He adjusted his position minutely, trying to find an angle, a sliver of opportunity. There was none. Only the child. His fingers, calloused from years of handling a rifle, tightened around the stock. The crosshairs danced, a cruel ballet of life and death. But this time, the target wasn't a combatant. It was a child, a shield, a pawn in a game of unspeakable cruelty. He could hear Bravo breathing steadily beside him, a calming presence, but even Bravo couldn't offer a solution to this. Alpha, status? Hayes' voice was sharper now, edged with panic. We're running out of time. The words were a direct order, a demand to violate everything he believed in. He closed his eyes for a fraction of a second, the image of the civilian's lifeless eyes seared into his memory. The weight of that past mistake, the guilt that had festered for years, threatened to crush him. He was a protector, not an executioner of the innocent. But what if inaction was a greater sin? What if his moral code, however deeply ingrained, condemned others to death? The thought was a venomous whisper in his ear. He opened his eyes, the world through the scope stark and unforgiving. The child shifted slightly, a small, innocent movement that tore at his resolve. He envisioned the chaos that would erupt if the hostage-taker made good on his threat, the irreversible loss of multiple lives. The tactical reality was brutal, one life or many. The choice was a monstrous one, a Sophie's choice played out in the cold, hard light of a sniper's scope. He remembered a conversation with a military psychologist, years after the civilian incident, about moral injury. The psychologist had spoken of the invisible wounds, the deep psychological pain that results from perpetrating, failing to prevent, or bearing witness to, acts that transgress deeply held moral beliefs. This was that injury, manifesting in real time, tearing at the very fabric of his being. He knew, with a chilling certainty, that this decision, whatever it was, would define the rest of his life. There was no escape from its consequences. The pressure mounted, an almost physical force. He could feel the sweat trickling down his back, cold against his skin. His heart hammered against his ribs, a frantic drum. He had to make the call. He had to choose. He raised the rifle, the familiar weight a cold comfort, a symbol of his terrible duty. His finger found the trigger, a hair's breadth away from the point of no return. His vision sharpened, the world narrowing to the small, terrible tableau in his scope. The child, the hostage-taker, the innocent lives waiting. His breath hitched. He had to make a choice. The silence in the nest was deafening, broken only by the frantic whispers over the comms and the frantic pounding of his own heart. He was Alpha, the precision instrument, the last resort. But he was also just a man, haunted by ghosts, facing an impossible choice. Then, a sudden, unexpected movement. The hostage-taker, momentarily distracted by something unseen, shifted his weight, his arm relaxing just enough. A fleeting, almost imperceptible gap opened, a sliver of opportunity. Not a clean shot, not a guaranteed one, but a chance. It was a fraction of a second, a blink-and-you-miss-it window. His training kicked in, overriding the internal screams. Instinct, honed by years of impossible situations, took over. He didn't think. He acted. The crosshairs snapped. A micro-adjustment, a breath held. The world narrowed to that single, impossible point. His finger tightened. The pressure building, then the shot. The sound was deafening, even through the suppressors, a sharp crack that reverberated through his bones. The hostage-taker lurched, a surprised gasp, and then collapsed, a dead weight. The child, momentarily released, stumbled backward, wide-eyed, unharmed. The clatter of the hostage-taker's weapon hitting the floor echoed in the sudden silence that followed the shot. Chaos erupted. Screams, shouts, the rapid deployment of the assault team. Alpha didn't see it. He was already pulling back from the scope, his body trembling, a cold sweat drenching him. Bravo was already on the radio, his voice urgent, confirming the hit, confirming the child was safe. The rush of the assault team's boots on the pavement below, the urgent whispers over the comms, the distant wail of more sirens approaching. It all blended into a cacophony. But Alpha heard none of it. The world was a blur, a cacophony of sound and light. He felt a wave of nausea, a profound emptiness. He had made the choice. He had taken the shot. The lives were saved. But at what cost to his own soul? In the immediate aftermath, the adrenaline crash was brutal. He felt detached, observing himself as if from a distance. The debriefing was a blur of questions and answers, tactical assessments, and psychological evaluations. They called him a hero. Commander Hayes shook his hand, his eyes filled with gratitude and relief. Bravo clapped him on the shoulder, a silent acknowledgement of the impossible burden he'd carried. But the praise, the relief, it all felt hollow. The image of the child, the terror in their eyes, was burned into his memory alongside the civilian from years ago. He was cleared again, justified again. But the moral injury was deeper this time, a chasm in his spirit. It wasn't just a wound, it was a void, a part of him that had been irrevocably lost in that fraction of a second. He spent weeks in a haze, the taste of copper and gunpowder lingering in his mouth, the echo of the shot in his ears. Sleep offered no escape, only vivid nightmares where the faces of the child and the civilian merged into one accusing specter. Years passed. The incident became a footnote in his service record, a testament to his unwavering skill under pressure. He retired, seeking the quiet life he'd always craved, but the quiet was never truly silent. The echoes of that shot, the agonizing decision, played on an endless loop in his mind. He sought help, spoke to counselors, tried to reconcile the protector with the executioner. He described the moment, the impossible choice, the feeling of his soul tearing. They spoke of moral injury, of the invisible wounds that fester deeper than any bullet. He volunteered, working with at-risk youth, trying to find a way to balance the scales, to make amends for the ghosts that haunted him. He taught them discipline, respect, the value of life, hoping that in shaping their futures, he could somehow atone for his past. He found solace in the tangible good he could do, in the small victories of seeing a troubled kid turn their life around. He never fully healed, perhaps no one ever truly does from such wounds. The chasm remained, a constant reminder of the price of survival, of the choices made under the most extreme duress. But he learned to carry the weight, to understand that some decisions leave indelible marks, and that heroism often comes at a price no medal can ever truly repay. He found a fragile peace in the quiet moments, in the small victories of everyday life, forever changed, forever marked, but still standing, a testament to resilience forged in the crucible of impossible choices. The echoes of that moment would follow him, a constant reminder of the true cost of war and the impossible choices it demands, leaving listeners to ponder the enduring burden of military service. His story, like countless others, is a testament to the unseen battles fought long after the last bullet has been fired, a quiet, profound struggle for meaning and redemption in a world that rarely offers easy answers. Thank you for listening to the story to the end. If you enjoyed it, don't forget to like and subscribe to the channel so you don't miss new episodes. See you soon.